Welcome back to continue our conversation on China and the United States collaboration in technology. Let's bring in our panel. With us in our studio, Amy Zalman is the CEO of Prescient, a consulting company on business and technology. Xiaochen Zhang is the president of FinTech for Good, an incubator company. He joins us from New York. And from Mountain View in California, Wang is the principal analyst and founder of Constellation Research. Welcome to all of you. Wang, let me start with you in California. We just heard from Craig Allen. He's the president of the US-China Business Council and a strong advocate for collaboration between the United States and China, especially on technology issues. But he did point out that he would like to see that take place with a level playing field and also with US concerns addressed, especially concerns on subsidies that are being paid to Chinese companies and technology transfer. How do you see that play out? How do you see collaboration play out?
You know, I think we've seen this collaboration happen over a longer period of time. The two world's economic superpowers do need to work with each other. The U.S. has a lot of advantages given its academic institutions and its ability to mass capital and get that into market to take an idea from concept to commercialization. China has a huge market, a huge potential with a lot of U.S. trained graduates as well. There's lots of opportunities to pursue things that are a little bit on the higher level for good that would be much more useful. And these include cooperation against areas around new types of energy, new types of disease, and solving big cures in terms of disease states, thinking about what happens in terms of understanding foreign relations, right? There's a lot of opportunities to cooperate in those international missions. The challenge right now is the fact that there is no intellectual property controls. There isn't really a good way to put that into the legislation in China, and also we have some significant issues thinking about what happens in terms of business practices that need to follow World Trade Organization standards. And I think that's the concern on the US side. I think on the Chinese side, there's this concern about having proper access, being seen as fair, and of course the US and its posture in terms of conversations about its role on the world stage. And so I think that's where the disconnect is, as well as the miscalculations on both ends as to who would blink first. And I think that's some of the big challenges that we've seen so far.
Amy, do you see this as a win-win proposition, or is it likely that politics and geopolitical interests, strategic interests, could get in the way?
It's possible that strategic interest could get in the way. That's what's unfolding in front of us. Yeah. But it's extremely important that this be resolved as a win-win because, as my colleagues on this show are making clear, this is a global technology. Right. It is inherently global. So unless two sides of the world decide to truly split off from each other, which is unfeasible, they really are going to have to work together, and they can do it well or they can do it badly.
One other thing, Amy, and that is the U.S. seems to be taking a very hard line in this, a very tough line in this. Is the U.S. being short-sighted? Because China has a growing middle class. I mean, it numbers in the hundreds of millions, consumers who are presently and potentially consumers of U.S. services and goods. Is there a risk of the U.S. losing out if it continues with this very hard-line posture?
I'm not in a position to speak on whether the United States is hardline, but it's very clear that there are shifts in power and there are shifts in consumer power. So it's important to take China into consideration and other countries like India and Indonesia as objects for our goods as well, recipients.
Zhang, as we pointed out in our report at the beginning, China has a lead over the U.S. in advanced manufacturing. We see that especially in the Apple slogan, designed in California, manufactured in China. How does one expand that particular ethos when we see people like President Trump framing this as China stealing U.S. jobs?
Yeah, I think number one, concern of that is really that's how you perceive it, and when we are in the world, in the globalization, and so all the countries are interdependent, and all the technology development are interconnected. So one country's advancements in technology, and then other country can benefit from that, and from now that's although we see. U.S. is the dominance of all technologies is not the factual as of now, but U.S. still just maintain a very high level of technology advancement compared with all the other countries. And we do see that if collaboration can be the framework, and we'll see that for both sides, no matter we talk about the manufacturers, business, or talk about the consumers, and all will just benefit from it.
Zhang raises a good point there. Does there need to be a competition between these two countries? Does there need to be some kind of a race for supremacy in technology like we saw during the space race? Would it not be better for companies, institutions, governments to cooperate with each other? Because the world at large faces some common problems, especially things like the challenge that climate change presents.
Yeah, there's some global areas where there's massive collaboration that's required. But the challenge here is not the fact that the Chinese are, quote unquote, stealing technology from the US, or the US feels that their intellectual property laws aren't being abided by. I think the challenge here is that we don't have a framework for communication and collaboration. And I think that's going to be very important going forward, given the fact that there are two factors. One, China's population dynamics look like this. Because of the one-child policy, in about 30 to 40 years, China faces a challenge like Japan has today, which is really having a declining population, aging population, which requires a lot more collaboration than the big posture that it's holding today. The US, on the other hand, is suffering a problem where it's incurring more and more debt in the economy. So in the long range, this cooperation is going to be important. But in the short term, on a political level, it's going to be two presidents with very, very large egos going at the moment, and hopefully their staff is finding a win-win at this moment.
Amy, you wrote a piece about Huawei. We've been talking about Huawei a lot in this discussion. That's the Chinese tech company. The US believes that Huawei is controlled by the Chinese government and that its technology can be used for intelligence gathering purposes. And you say that thinking is outmoded.
Correct. The entire world, 5G, artificial intelligence, the algorithms that drive them, these are all creating a world in which every technology is essentially a dual-use technology. So thinking of certain technologies as dual-use or as potentially weaponized is not useful thinking. As all of your speakers are noting, this is a global technology. It spans countries. It's really very important to start to innovate not only in technology, but in diplomacy and in the collaboration and cooperation that's being discussed, and to think maybe about different kinds of compacts for corporations and governments, and citizens, corporations, and governments,
right,
and different kinds of compacts that are global as opposed to international or draw on metaphors from the Cold War.
You say it's a global technology, Amy, but is the mistake we're making is that we still think in terms of nation states as defining the world right now?
Yes, I believe that. Yeah. Nation states aren't going anywhere anytime soon. The state is not withering, but we see the rise of other forms of power, both at the level of individuals and corporations. So yes, thinking in this way, particularly about China and the United States, is not fruitful.
Zhang, you have said that China will become one of the major tech markets in the world, and that if US companies want to expand, then they need to start getting involved in China, start investing in China. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Just looking at the past few years, that's how deeply connected the two market was, and when we just talk about R&Ds, that we are seeing more and more peer-reviewed papers jointly written by both the Chinese authors combined with the U.S. authors, and when we just look at companies for no matter it's Google, Apple, or any American companies, and then many of the factory parts are just happen in China, and many of the final products are also just being taking China as the main market, and from those market feedback, those products are being just improved, and which just benefits all people in the whole world. So we are seeing that collaboration definitely benefits everyone, and of course that if you just go to the conflict side, that's now that's punishment as a way to just prevent this whole globalization process is less and less effective, and when any individual companies being punished with actual taxation and all that, and then they still can just access to other market in other countries, and so then by the end of the day, who will just bear that cost? That will be the consumer in the country which the punishment was installed. Yeah.
Ray, I want to get back to a point that you talked about a moment ago, and that is the whole question of forced technology transfer. It's become a big issue between the United States and China. In fact, it's a key focus of the trade talks that's taking place right now. How much of an obstacle is that to greater cooperation in technology innovation?
You know, I think it's a huge obstacle at the moment, because one of the challenges for everybody, companies that are investing and building in China, is a couple of things. It's capital controls. They can't take their money out. And in many cases, they won't have access in the country unless there is a forced technology transfer. Now, while that is not formalized, if you talk to many CEOs and companies that have invested in China, they're constantly being spied, they're constantly being targeted, and then they're also constantly having their IP taken away from them by their most trusted associates. And I think that has to stop if you want to have that level of cooperation. On the other piece, I also want to add to something Amy was asking about on the nation state, and I think it's a great point. We're also at a point where societies, regardless of what country or nation state they belong to, have differing views as to technologies like AI. Is AI for good, or will AI be used for evil? Will AI be used by a state to control their citizens, or will AI be allowing people to collaborate and inspire and innovate? And I think that's really the question that's at hand, is which economic systems, political systems, and ethics will be applied. And we don't know yet if it's going to be driven by nation states or if it's going to be driven by societies.
Zhang, what do you make of that dispute between the United States and China on technology transfers?
Yeah, the interesting part of that, in the Western media, and it was being just perceived that the whole AI development was being driven by the Chinese government through the national policy. But just when you just look at the data and the history, that many of the largest companies like Baidu and Alibaba and others, which have already started a lot of advancement in AI much earlier, before the national policy was introduced. And to just saying that it's the government just drive the AI development and then to control it is definitely far from the fact. And instead, that many of the commentators just put it forward that it's the private sector which is for the commercial purpose, or just enter into the competition to just drive the innovation in AI and blockchain and the Internet of Things and the 5G. So all of them, I think that's definitely from the perception, again, is very important. We are seeing the facts, and how do you understand it, how do you interpret it is very, very important. And how to just come up with a joint shared vision, that is extremely important at this stage.
Amy, let's turn for a moment to the debate here in the United States. The Wall Street Journal published a piece last month which said that if the U.S. is to compete with China in technology, it needs to, and this is the journal's words, fix the mismatch between its declared national technology priorities and the deployment of research funding. In other words, they've got to start spending money.
Correct. It would be good to, I mean, if you want a good mousetrap, you have to build it, fund it. Correct.
Zhang, is it realistic for the United States to try and block a company like Huawei?
Yeah, and I think that, again, the data and the facts will just tell the story. And when you look at Huawei's return in just April, after all this efforts try to just influence the market happen, and Huawei's profits jumped by 25%. So as it is very clear that this kind of punishment didn't work. And the second point, just when you just look at Huawei's global network, it has more than 100. It is selling in 170 countries. And it's obvious that U.S. is a very important market, and also U.S. trading partners are very important. But definitely, it's not all the partners closing door. And with the 170 countries which are still trading with Huawei, and I think that to make this punishment type of tools effective is very, very difficult.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.